All you need to know is a new dawn is breaking. 100 will give their lives so that just one may live. I am expediting that change.
With the revival and renaissance of the Resident Evil franchise over the last several years due to the success of Resident Evil 7 and 8, as well as the remakes, specifically 2 and 4, many people will claim that it not only saved the Resident Evil franchise, but survival horror in general. But now that the dust has cleared and Resident Evil 4 Remake has successfully released, we are now in the realm of the unknown. Of course, they have hinted at a possible Resident Evil 5 remake, but there's also the possibility of Resident Evil 9. So today I'd like to discuss the future of the Resident Evil series. So let's start with remakes. After the success of the last few, I don't think Capcom will stop, and they already hinted at the possibility of a remake of 5 with the end credit scene of Resident Evil 4 Remake. Now, this one is a little tricky because Resident Evil 5, similar to Resident Evil 4, was one of those games that doesn't really need a remake. In fact, it still looks good to this day and it plays really well. In fact, it's probably the best or one of the best co-op games ever, but it's also one of the worst Resident Evil games because it wasn't as scary as previous titles and they leaned heavily into the action aspect. This was also the beginning of the downfall for the Resident Evil franchise, but funny enough, it's also one of the highest selling Resident Evil games. In fact, it was the highest selling Resident Evil games for a very long time. So based off of that logic, Resident Evil 5 is most likely going to be the next game to be remade, and it would give Capcom a chance to rectify their mistakes of the past and actually make a great Resident Evil game. As this game doesn't necessarily have the greatest story within the franchise, so I think this is one of those rare scenarios where if they remade the story from the ground up, a lot of people wouldn't mind that. There were many things in this game that were not great, such as Irving or Jill's inclusion in the game. I think we all love Jill, but her being in this particular game was kind of weird and the boss wasn't all that great. But also the setting could change. I don't think many people would be bothered because, let's be honest, it's not that memorable compared to previous titles such as the mansion, the RPD building, the village, or even the castle. But based on the ending of RE4 Remake, it does seem as if Capcom is going to change some major things about Resident Evil 5, which I think is a good thing. So long as certain aspects stay the same, such as Wesker's tomfoolery and his awesome boss battles, as well as the amazing co-op. In fact, they should incorporate the Lost Nightmares DLC into the actual main story, maybe even making it the prologue or beginning section of Resident Evil 5, introducing you into the game. Or maybe even basing the entire game off of that, because in my opinion, that was the best part of Resident Evil 5. Again, Resident Evil 5, although it's not a great Resident Evil game, it is one of the best co-op games of all time, and it is one of the best-selling Resident Evil games in the entire franchise, so most likely it is the next to get a remake, but I don't think they should do it just yet, as I think they should actually go even further back. A lot of people want them to remake Code Veronica because it would also finish the story on Claire and what she's been doing ever since Resident Evil 2, but also because the game kinda sucks and a lot of people want the game to actually be good. By far, this is one of the worst Resident Evil games in the franchise, which is odd considering just how important this game is to the overall plot of the story. It continues the plot of Wesker and Chris and also gives us the Wesker that we all love today. This is a game many people would love to see succeed, but is dragged down by the negatives such as the awkwardness and slog of a gameplay, the weird level design, and of course, Steve. But Capcom managed to make characters like Carlos and Ashley into great characters, so I have faith in them being able to remake Steve, which is why many people are looking forward to a modern take of Code Veronica, as it gives Capcom a second chance in making a great game that's hidden underneath a bunch of garbage. But I think they shouldn't remake this game just yet, even though many people, myself included, want it. I think they should go even further back to the very beginning. Yes, Resident Evil 1 already has a remake, and it's considered one of the greatest remakes of all time, as many people consider it better than the original. And in fact, it doesn't really need a remake because the game still looks and plays very good even today. But I would love to see a modern take on the original Resident Evil in the same way they tackled Resident Evil 2 and 4 Remake. This would also be a great way to reintroduce audiences into how this all started in the first place, but also Albert Wesker, as there's a whole new generation of gamers that have no idea who this guy even is, and instead of thrusting them straight into Resident Evil 5, which is basically the unfortunate end of Albert Wesker, as I think he was taken out a little too early, reintroduce him from the very beginning and let us know who he is, and do the Albert Wesker trilogy. Do Resident Evil 1 Remake, then Code Veronica, and then end it off with Resident Evil 5, the downfall of Albert Wesker. Seeing just how great their level design is and creating iconic areas such as the village and castle of Resident Evil 8 and 4, as well as the RPD building of Resident Evil 2, the mansion would be one of the most terrifying and fun experiences in video game history. The game would be a lot more scary and probably be a lot more conservative with ammo compared to other games in the series. With the unique puzzles, the incredible level design of the mansion rivaling that of From Software's, the conservative ammo, and the mystery of not knowing what's lurking behind every door and corner, throw in the Crimson Head zombies and Lisa Trevor who could chase you around the mansion similar to Mr. X from Resident Evil 2, the two best additions from the Resident Evil remake, you have a recipe for success. And this would result in Resident Evil becoming the survival horror experience again, but with a modern take similar to that of Resident Evil 2 and 4 Remake, thus reinventing the survival horror genre yet again. And with the way Capcom is handling the remakes, this might be their way of cleaning up their timeline because, let's be honest, it's kinda confusing. But enough about remaking the past, let's talk about the future, Resident Evil 9. Where do they go from here? As the Winter Saga is officially over, and I'm glad with that, as the first person perspective was fun and unique. I think I can speak for a lot of us that we would like things to go back to how it originally was. Even Capcom knows this, as they gave Resident Evil 8 a third person perspective update. Now there are a bunch of characters that we still need some closure on, and although I do like Chris, I think he should take a back seat because he's been in more than enough games, and there's a lot more other characters that deserve some time in the spotlight. Most likely I can see one being Leon. We haven't seen what he's been up to ever since the end of Resident Evil 6, and he's been getting a lot of exposure over the last few years because of the remakes of 2 and 4, and he's obviously one of the most popular Resident Evil characters in the entire franchise. Another character I think we would love to see is Jill. We have not seen her in a mainline Resident Evil game since Resident Evil 5, which is a crime, as she is one of the most interesting main protagonists in the franchise, and there is a lot to unpack with her character, as we could follow the events of her PTSD from the Raccoon City incident, as well as being Wesker's puppet. And as recently revealed to us, she is aging slower due to the effects of the T virus, so that could be a reason for why she looks so young in Resident Evil 9 going forward. And she is definitely a character that deserves a lot more respect considering just how large of a fan base she has. There are other characters we could follow up with, maybe Sherry, we haven't seen her in a while, or Alex Wesker, I don't know about that one, but maybe even Ashley Graham, as she proposed interest in wanting to become a special ops agent similar to Leon in the Resident Evil 4 remake, and I think that would be pretty cool in my opinion. But regardless of who the hero of this game is, Capcom is in desperate need of a new major antagonist for the Resident Evil franchise, as this hole has been left open with the absence of Albert Wesker. They had a chance with Lady D, who unfortunately didn't get enough time in Resident Evil 8 despite all the marketing, which I think not even Capcom were aware or ready for how much love that she would get. There was also Heisenberg. They could have done something very interesting with him, having him be the new Albert Wesker, planning and doing some schemes with a cool ability and cool character design, but he's dead, so they threw that out there. Honestly, this has been an issue for Resident Evil for quite some time. There hasn't been any iconic villains outside of Wesker. They could have done something with Spencer. He was built up for such a long time, but the first and last time you saw him, he died in a cutscene in Resident Evil 5, which to me is absolutely crazy. But either way, I think the next Resident Evil game is going to be a way to reinvent the series similar to that of Resident Evil 4 and Resident Evil 7 and take this franchise into completely new territory. We've seen them dive into psychological horror with Resident Evil 7 and 8, and I think that's a great way for the series to continue by not only being attacked physically but also mentally and giving us some new scares, which I think would be absolutely fun, similar to the original build in Resident Evil 4 where you were chased by hallucinations of the Hookman. I truly think this would be a great experience, as Donna's territory and the dollhouse was easily one of the best experiences in the Resident Evil 8 Village. Plus the hallucinations in Shadow of Rose DLC was really fun, so I would love to see them continue on this trend and completely reinvent the survival horror genre once again. But regardless, I cannot wait to see what game they come up next, and I cannot wait to be a part of this adventure into the complete unknown.